What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Bodacious Rant with Burn and Rye. Hope everybody's been good, enjoying their summer, and enjoying the latest season of The Boys on Amazon Prime. It was a long time coming. Well, not really, because last season came out last year, so it's actually or the year before. I think it was the year before, huh?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of years because there was the delay because of the writer and actor strikes last year.
That's right. But we did have Gen V last year, so that was fun. This is going to be a bit of a spoiler review since the season just wrapped up, everyone. So we're just going to give our quick review of the season, and then we'll dive into spoilers on what we liked, what we didn't like so much from this season. So if you haven't watched it all, definitely just cut us off after our rantings and maybe check out the season and come on back just so that we could dive into our thoughts and you could put your thoughts in the comments as well. And as always, if you do like the video, please give us the thumbs up. We do appreciate that. And if you have not already, please subscribe just so we can stay up to date on all the goodness and ring the bell and all that good stuff too. So yeah, so this season takes place sometime after season 3, in which, Starlight is no longer Starlight. She's just completely trying to abandon that superhero idea because she doesn't want to be like that. And Huey and the boys are just struggling to take out Homelander and Victoria Newman, which they found out last season that she is a soup, and she definitely is responsible for a lot of deaths. And with that, we have some new additions, mainly the two with Valerie Curry, who plays this right-wing soup called Firecracker, and then Susan Hayward, who plays basically a combination of like Magneto and Lex Luthor in the form of Sister Sage. And yeah, so with all that being said, like with the new additions and everything, I felt like, I don't know if the strikes had anything to do with it, or I don't know if Eric Kripke's just getting tired of the fandom with all the... If you guys look up the Boys controversy, there's going to be several things that pop up with this show, I'm sure. Mostly just people's opinions of the show and what it's entailing and stuff like that. So I don't know if it has anything to do with that. I just felt like this season was just okay. I felt like it was a little too obvious with its messaging, and I like the other ones in the last couple seasons. I felt like were a little bit more kind of under the radar for most people, but... With all that being said, I'm still giving it a 3 out of 5. I still found it still had its enjoyable moments. Very gory still, so just keeps pushing that envelope. So if you're on the squeamish side, or maybe you don't want to watch this with your parents, definitely don't recommend doing so. But yeah, like I said, I think it's still worth watching. I'm definitely looking forward to the next and final 5th season, but this one, compared to at least the last 3, is definitely the lowest of the low. So...
Mm-hmm. So how many rantings out of 5 are you giving it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said that, Bern. I apologize. I'm giving it a.
Or maybe I missed it.
No. I think you know what? I think I just blew past it. Man, I'm tired. It's a 3 out of 5 for me, where it's average, and that's kind of a disappointment with The Boys, because The Boys is one of those shows that I think has been really smart and really well done the last few years, but this one just ended off on that. So yeah, I apologize, everyone. It's a 3 out of 5 rantings for me. I still recommend watching it if you're a fan. If not, then you're good on missing out on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think easily for me, this one was the most inconsistent season, and probably the worst season of the 4 that we've gotten. But, when I say that, it's like, you're comparing it to 3 seasons, which in my opinion were absolutely excellent and a lot better than a lot of shows that we've gotten, over the years that the shows have been airing. So, in comparison to those, like, 3, great seasons, this one does pale in comparison for the most part. But I think but I think the season starts off really strong and it ends really strong. It's just a lot of things in the middle that kind of left me scratching my head, where it felt like sometimes certain plot lines were just sort of introduced and sort of faded out, and some things were kind of just dropped, and it felt like we were just spinning plates, especially with some of the secondary characters, much like Frenchie and Kimiko, where it felt like, what are we doing with a lot of these characters? It seems like we had them in one place last season and we kind of have them in the same place this season until, the very end. So it felt like there wasn't a lot of progression with a lot of the characters. It felt kind of a little bit stagnant on that end. But for some characters, I mean, in particular, the big ones, of course, like Homelander, Butcher and Annie and like the big characters. It felt like yeah, there definitely was some progression there, in particular with the Homelander, um, Ryan and Butcher like trio. I thought that they handled all that stuff really really well. So yeah, I mean I'm there with you. There were certainly the gross out moments for longtime fans. There was some really good character moments sprinkled here and there. It's just overall in terms of the plot, in terms of the overall plot of the season, it felt like much like my feelings on the Bear season 3, where it felt like this was kind of a setup season for the season 5 to come, which is confirmed to be the last one of the boys. So it felt like moving chess pieces into places, but that sort of movement wasn't as interesting to me as I think the payoff is probably going to be next season. So for me, this one is also going to be a 3 out of 5. Overall, I really really enjoyed it, and like I said, in comparison to the other seasons, it doesn't hold up as much, but compared to a lot of other shows that we get throughout the year, it's still probably right up there along the top.
Yeah, I mean, I think like compared to the shows that we've had this year, like Invincible and The Bear, that I was really looking forward to, this is still up there. I think The Bear I did enjoy a little bit more in terms of quality and stuff wise, but this one is definitely still a solid season. And Invincible season 2 wasn't bad. It just for so much waiting on that one, it fell flat. But okay, so now that we have our rantings out of the way, it's about 3 for both of us, everyone. Feel free to stop watching now if you haven't caught up with the whole season or if you've watched it at all. So we're now going to get into the nitty gritty to a certain extent. So I always like, let's just start off with the positive stuff. What we did like, Burn. I think this is definitely not only Anthony Starr's strongest season of acting, but I think also Carl Urban's. So I give him props on that. Where Homelander's episode 4, where we just really got his closure, quote unquote, with his beginnings in the lab and stuff, basically being a lab rat. It kind of painted a picture on why he's such a monster. But even then, we found out then it's like, dude, you were the Antichrist straight out of birth. Like we didn't know how to react to, like, that's what that one lady doctor said. I forgot her name, but she essentially was just telling him, like, we were scared of you. Like, you killed a lot of people as soon as you woke up. Like, so we didn't know what to do, and we didn't know any better. Still doesn't not I don't think it redeems him whatsoever. It definitely does paint a better picture of his mentality and why he is the way he is. And then I think with Butcher this season, how Carl Urban is how Carl Urban portrayed him, of like he keeps reverting back to his old ways, especially with Jeffrey D. Morgan, and then let me see what the other actress's name is. I apologize. The one who's also Invincible, but Chantel Van Zanten as Becca. That, like, both of them are. He's happy. He's having his own Emperor's New Groove moment where he has Angel on one side, the devil on the other, just keep tugging at him on what part of himself to appeal to. I think he did that really well. And the last season where he's just confessing to Huey his emotions and what he wants him to do after he dies was just very emotional and really strong. So I think the acting all around was pretty good, especially for them two. And then I guess the only other thing, and then I will say the other person that stood out for me was Huey. I think Huey's arc of because he's been through the shit since the very first episode, losing his girlfriend, getting in with the boys, being on the run, and then just being betrayed by some of his favorite people like Butcher, Newman, all this stuff left and right. And then with everything going on, he still found it in his heart to be like, I don't want to hate people anymore. I don't want to hold on to this. I just want to keep moving forward, not only for his mentality, but for his soul, really. So I think that was, Jack Quaid is just excelling as an actor this season. So I think, though, for them three, those are my favorite characters this season, Burn. I don't know how you felt about them, the acting in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the acting across the board was great, and it has been great for the entirety of the series. I can't think of really any performance that I've like thought was subpar in throughout any of the seasons. At least none come to mind. So I'm definitely with you on that. I think the performances all around, and and especially in this season, were really good. And yeah, I do agree with you. Like I mentioned, I think the Homelander, Ryan, and Butcher storyline was my favorite of the season, just because of how they're two sides of the same coin, and they always have been, Butcher and Homelander. But the thing that they're going through in this season, the idea of facing their own mortality, right? Where it's like Homelander is dealing with, I'm gonna get old and I'm gonna die eventually, and quite literally, Butcher is dying in the beginning of the season, where he thinks he has this cancer that's gonna take him out by the end of it, and both of them are trying in their own way to leave the world in a better place in their mind for Ryan. Everything they sort of justify doing it for Ryan, and it's been interesting seeing them this season, how each one approaches that, and how despite his more violent and lesser nature, Butcher, at least in this season, makes that attempt, right, to kind of reach across the aisle, to sort of do things a little bit differently in his approach to fighting these supers, and in sort of his way of connecting with Ryan, and taking a more understanding and more empathetic and a slower approach that he does. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out for him, which is the tragedy of the show and this character, where it seems like he's going to revert back into the Butcher that we saw in the first season. But to see sort of that growth for that character to try to do that was really interesting, and I did really enjoy that, and I thought Carl Urban acted that really, really well. And on the flip side, with Homelander, Anthony Starr's been great since the beginning. Severely looked under for Emmy nominations across the board. But again, his sort of idea of like trying to make the world a better place for Ryan, and sort of manifesting in this very authoritarian dictator type of role that he's trying to work himself into, while at the same time being completely incompetent and dumb. Like, I like that they didn't end the season where he is in the position of like the actual president. I thought it was great that it's like, oh no, he's too dumb, he's too idiotic, he's too a slave to his own emotions to sort of do that. So I like that they didn't push that character into that position. And he's more in a little more in sort of a side position by the end of it, like by proxy. But as we see him, as he takes more of a leadership role, he just gets worse and worse, which is great to see him sort of like fail upwards. And I thought that sort of progress through this season, him having Ryan and sort of losing him by the end, that sort of dynamic between them is a little bit up in the air with in terms of how it ended between Ryan and Homelander and Ryan and Butcher. But sort of, yeah, just thinking he's doing the right thing and just failing at it every opportunity is just always great to see.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. Like, Anthony Starr has really just excelled with this. I think this is his strongest season, and if he doesn't get a nomination for episode 4 alone, whoever's doing that is just stupid. But also, I like that you put it the best way. He's always failing upward, because even when he was, I think season 2 was his lowest point, where he actually lost almost everything, but then got it back in last season, and now this season he's essentially like Dick Cheney. Like, he's gonna be running the government to a certain extent, or at least the strong arm of it all. So it's gonna be a very interesting season. They're already talking about next season being like the apocalypse, and so I'm very excited to see that. And also, I think the only other good things I will kind of, along with the acting and stuff like that, I will say is just the new additions of Firecracker and Sister Sage, who by my understanding are completely new characters. I think those two, Valerie Curry and Susan Hayward, also deserve some nominations, because they flippin' killed it. Just Firecracker literally being the superhero version of Marjorie Taylor Greene, I thought was amazing. She's so stupid and funny, but just also someone you can't stand. So I think she killed that. And Sister Sage, I think, was actually very chilling. Like, every season, we keep getting new villains to a certain extent. Like, the first one was Homelander and all those guys, like the 7. And then the next one, we got Stormfront. Last season was Soldier Boy. And then this one with them, with Sister Sage, it's like, damn, we finally got the brains and the brawn on the 7. And it's just not a great mix. So I'm very scared for the characters in that one. And I think the ending of this season, while it's not the best finale out of all the last couple, I think it was still a great way to kind of set things up. Again, it's a double-edged sword. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but I think the last episode was like, now we're kind of, the characters finally got to a certain point in their lives where maybe they're a little bit better off, and it's like, yeah, nope, back to square one. So I'm definitely looking forward to the last season. Hopefully, it's good.
Yeah, those two new additions when Sister Sage and Firecracker were, I thought they were excellent. I thought Sister Sage was a really fun. Again, the boys does a really good job of sort of taking those superheroes and flipping them on their head. Where she is, the smartest person in the world, like you mentioned, sort of like a Reed Richards or like a Iron Man or like a Professor X in some sort of way. Just someone who is known for their mind, but sort of flipping that into being like, oh, she's so smart that she's just kind of bored of the world, and all of this is just some sort of exercise for her to just feel something, like just to sort of get her kicks, because everything that she experiences in her normal way is just dull to her. So I thought that was a lot of fun, and seeing what the smartest person would kind of do in this world where they're a little bit more twisted, a little bit more demented, like a lot of other boys characters was. So that was great. And then yeah, I mean Valerie Curry as Firecracker was great. I mean, it just being this sort of propaganda mouthpiece, riling up tension, in society. But I did like, that she brought a lot of dimension to that character. It could have been very easy for both her and for the writers to make that sort of person just be what they are. But in her interactions with Annie, I thought it added a lot to where she sort of comes from, always being that sort of underdog, overlooked and sort of kicked down and spat on, and that manifesting into this very vindictive, very angry person, and her taking that out on everybody. I thought was really well done and really interesting. And again, I thought they could have handled that worse, but I thought they did a really excellent job with that character. So all around with those two, I really did enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. Before we start getting into the negatives, Burn, is there any more positives you want to end off on?
Yeah, I mean, just the last one I think is probably A Train. I thought A Train's storyline was fantastic, and seeing him in the deep where they were last season, sort of vying to get back into the good graces of Homelander and Vought and being in part of the Seven, and to see that in this season, the way it was handled, where they both start in the same position and they sort of diverge, where the deep just kind of gets a little bit more into the deep, for no pun intended, where he's just kind of in this cycle of he can't escape, trying to be this person that Homelander wants him to be, foregoing all of his own personal things, with his relationship with Ambrosia, I believe the name of the octopus was, foregoing that and just sort of just being content and being this lackey for Homelander was disappointing to see. There was an opportunity for him to do a little bit better, to take sort of responsibility for his actions, but he completely went the other way with it. Whereas A Train, we got to see, took that opportunity where MM, was able to sort of rehabilitate him, put him on the path of making things right. Obviously he still has a lot to answer for, but I think he's taking those steps, which is really good. And in that moment, we see where he does actual saving someone for the first time, and we see that effect on him. And I thought that was all great. So I thought that was fantastic. The A Train and the and the deep storyline, the deep for the comedy and the idiotic purposes, and for A Train with the actual movement into being something better. I thought was handled really well.
Yeah, I forgot to mention A Train. He is on a very slow path to redemption, but the Deep is just staying true to himself, just being the complete piece of shit that he is. So, it all works out for everyone. And I also will say the last thing were the cameos, like Tilda Swinton voicing Ambrosia. I thought that was really smart because she has a very elegant and soothing voice. And then Will Ferrell in the A Train biopic was just perfect. Like, I love Will Ferrell, and it's like we know he could never do a serious movie like he's done serious stuff, but for that movie it was just like, no, dude, it's essentially like a Blindside version for A Train. It's just, no, it's not gonna fly. But the fact that he was in it was great. So with all that being said, now with the things I think that kind of irked me this season, for me, I think the writing was just like I was talking about before. I think it was just too obvious with certain stuff this time. It kind of took the subtlety and the symbolism out of stuff to a certain extent. Like, with like, soup critical soup theory, like all these, just the imagery and stuff. I was just like, oh man, I was kind of hoping to try and guess it a little bit more, because I felt like that's where the writing really excelled. That was much more subtle. Like, it was still obvious, don't get me wrong, especially with like Stormfront and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of miss that subtlety to a certain extent with stuff, especially in the dialogue. Um, and I think, and then just the ending, like writing wise, it was just one of those things. Like as much as I liked where the characters got and how it ended, it's also like it took a little long to get to this point, and um, I think it was a little too convenient that Sister Sage came out and was like, "Oh, I planned all of this. This is exactly where I want us to go." It's like, how could you anticipate everybody else's moves? Like Homelanders, I can understand, but how can you account for like Butcher and the boys to do what they're gonna do and all that stuff? Like, I just think it was a little too convenient. That's all for me.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. With those characters and with those sort of reveals, that can definitely get to the point where it becomes a little bit unbelievable. For me, I think it worked enough in the sense where when she was saying that, oh, I planned this all, she did mention, oh, I did have to like pivot at certain points and like kind of reevaluate like her plan and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think when she got to the point where she was letting Homelander into her plan and he kept messing it up. I think her leaving him in the dark did make sense, but yeah, maybe there could have been a little bit of a better way to show how she was able to pivot and actually like enact her plan. Maybe like a sort of like a Guy Ritchie style flashback into like she was there all along. Moving the pieces and like making things happen the way she wanted to. Could have been fun. So yeah, I agree. It wasn't that strong, but for me that didn't detract a little that much in my opinion. Um, but let's see on the other front, when it comes to the subtlety, I guess, and the way the show handles the topical conversations that it does. For me, this season didn't really feel any different. Personally, I feel like it's always been sort of like the baseball bat in terms of its subtlety. I think it's always like been pretty upfront and like in the way that it sort of comments on the larger social political climate in particular here in America. I mean, the villain of season 2 was a literal Nazi, and the villain of season 3 was the representation of all the bad things about America in terms of like its racism, its misogyny, and its history and that. So, I guess in sort of it was a little. I guess with when you come into the firecracker character, there's a little bit more of a less subtle way, the way that sort of like manifests itself, where you have a character saying all these things that we do see on the news and other things. So yeah, I do see where it's a little bit more upfront than I guess it was before. So yeah, I'm a little bit here or there with that one. For me, it didn't bug me too much. I thought the show's kind of just been consistent on that end. But I can see where some people might take issue with it. Just feels a little bit less tactful or less up to the quality standard that we have seen before. So I won't disagree on that end with that sort of a idea of the way that it's commenting on politics as a whole.
No, I mean, again, I'm not trying. I'm not disagreeing with you either. I know it has been pretty obvious with certain stuff. I think it's just a matter of people finally realizing it. Like this season, that's making fun of everyone. Like people are now catching on. It's satirical, and it's like, how do you not get that from the beginning? But yeah, I think maybe it's more of a quality issue that it just didn't feel as tight knit as it should have been, or at least like the previous seasons have. So yeah, it just wasn't jiving for me. I do want to kind of go back and rewatch all of it, even though it's a lot to take in with each season, just because a lot of messed up stuff happens and messed up things are said. But I just got to relive that quality. And then I guess while I did like the characters for the most part, I think it's the way that some of them were written, specifically like Ryan's inconsistency was all over the place. Like, the way they ended off last season was how he's kind of liking the idea that Homelander killed someone because he wanted to. And also it kind of was defending him, even though it's like you both are supers. Like you guys are basically bulletproof. Like what can honestly hurt you? But then this season, it's like he's off and on about it. Like he wants to be good, but then he does what Homelander thinks he should do. Like it was just all over the place. And I know we were talking about that. You made me think about it more. Was Erin Moriarty's Starlight? That it's because I felt like last season she was the most confident, and like she left the 7 and she knew how to control herself. This one, it's like she's almost reverted back to season one where it's like she's just starting out. It's like Starlight, you've or Annie, you've been through this shit. Like, come, I would expect you to kind of handle yourself a little bit better. I just felt like her character was a little too, not downplayed. I guess maybe just not. She's not up to bat as like she has been before. Um, and then and then the Frenchie and Kimiko thing. How like they, I thought we knew they were in love with each other last season, but then she wants Frenchie to date the guy who played Gaz. I forget his name, but I like that actor. Like she wanted him to be happy, and they're not together. But then by the end they are. It's like I thought this was already settled. This just doesn't. It was just very inconsistent with some of those characters, and like I think the main characters they got it on point for the most part, but then the side characters they were just like, we don't know what to do. We're just adding almost like a CW show. It's just drama for drama's sake.
Yeah, in particular with the Annie and the damn, I'm blanking on who the other character was. Oh, Ryan, the Ryan character. Where I feel like the idea of their storyline and the things that were happening around them were far more interesting and far more better written than they were themselves. With the Ryan side, it was I agree with you. Where it felt like his character was very inconsistent. Where it felt like he was whoever the writer wanted to be in that moment. Like there was one moment where he's recoiling at the idea of like what's Vought's doing. That the image of superheroes is like a manufactured thing, and he's not really like jiving with it. And then the next minute, he's taking pleasure in watching a woman, smack this guy. I mean, he deserved it, obviously, but it's just like that doesn't really fit with like the Ryan that we knew beforehand. It was a little bit more kind and compassionate and reserved. And then the next minute, he's like, I don't really know if I want to do these things with my dad, and then I want to stay with my dad. Again, it was just very like all over the place. And again, kids are impressionable. They really don't always know what they want at certain points. But it felt like his character wasn't defined. It didn't feel like he had any sort of perspective really, or any sort of stance. It just because it flip-flopped from moment to moment, and then it just served whatever point the narrative wanted at that time. So he was much more of a plot point this season than he was just like an actual living breathing person, in my opinion. So yeah, that didn't really work for me. Again, I do love the story as a whole, the push and pull between Homelander and Butcher and him at the center of it, but I wish they would have given him a little bit more dimension, or at least have him you know be more of himself, or the kid that we've grown to know, or instead of just like being whatever the moment asked of him. So that was pretty disappointing on that end. And yeah, in terms of the Annie character, it was weird. In its execution was the part that I felt was a bit of a letdown. Where I do like the idea of her having sort of this crisis of identity. Where she's now left that Starlight image behind, along with her tenure as one of the seven at Vought, and her kind of having to be in the world as herself and have to sort of take on that criticism that she was luckily shielded from because she was part of the seven before. So she has having to deal with that giant propaganda machine on the other side of it. So I did like, again, I did like the idea of that character and that sort of like psychological effect it has on her and her powers. But where like it really dropped the ball for me was the way that she kind of gets her powers at the end, where it's just sort of in that 5-minute montage at the end of it. It felt that sort of her storyline, like if that's supposed to climax with her being confident in herself, and and really taking on this role and not being afraid to go against Vought and all that, and get her powers back in that sort of heroic moment. For it to happen in that montage at the very end of the season just felt like very disappointing in sort of how they resolve that character's issues for the season. So yeah, it was the execution for me that was severely lacking on that aspect. And yeah, I agree with you. The Kimiko and Frenchie storyline felt like that was one of those that was just spinning its plates. It was like, it felt like weird to regress from last season, and to get back to the point at the end of the season where they were at the end of the last season just felt like a repeated beat over and over again for these characters. And again, the storylines that they did bring up, where it's like, okay, she wants to go against these human traffickers, but that never really sort of manifests. And him coming to terms with his past, like we have seen him do the last few seasons, it was just a mess all around with those two characters, and I feel like they deserve better because they were some of the most fun characters in the show, and to do this to them after the end of last season was just kind of felt very annoying.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you on that. The only other thing I didn't care for that I'm gonna end off on for this review is just I didn't care for Black Noir like coming back, even though they had some funny moments. I just compared to the last character and what we learned about him last season, I felt like it was almost a disservice to it, to that character. Because again, total monster, not a good person whatsoever, but like it's just I just didn't care for them doing that. I would rather have it been like a different hero, kind of like Sage or Firecracker, or someone they could have pulled from the lore and just kind of retooled and stuff like that. I think it would have been. I will say this, even though it's like not important. I would have liked for Tech Knight to have like his suit to be shown, but he was such a piece of shit too. I couldn't stand him. But that's what kind of that was like another highlight. I forgot to mention that, but. Other than that, any other negatives that you wanted to kind of get off your chest before we finish up, Vern?
No, I mean, in terms of the Black Noir thing, I didn't mind it as much. I felt like it was more of a failure on last season, where what they did with that character, where it felt like were giving it backstory, and this felt like they were building up to a certain thing that was going to happen, maybe a conflict between him and Homelander, and then that just sort of like faded out because Homelander killed him. It felt like that narrative through line was just kind of cut out at the legs underneath it, and we didn't really get a satisfying conclusion to that. Not that I don't mind, Homelander killing him, but it felt like it was building up to something a little bit more interesting on that end, and I felt like that was one of the few things that the last season dropped the ball on. And yeah, the way they sort of brought him in this back in this season with a different person, sort of assuming that title. They could have done more with it for sure. Although I did enjoy the comedic beats between him and him and the Deep, so I did like their camaraderie. I did like the idea of him sort of just being the embodiment of Vought, sort of not being able to manage their own issues, where he's always asking for direction, asking to be told what to do. Because again, that just sort of just shows that this company doesn't really have any sort of direction. It's just kind of living off of or succeeding off of the fact that they have supers in this season and this in this show. And it's like, yeah, other than that, they're just kind of incompetent in terms of how they manage their people. So I did like that side of it, but yeah, I do agree with they could have done more with it. But I think the biggest issue with that per character in particular is a side effect from last season.
That's very fair. I would also say in general, Vought is downgraded ever since last season when Homelander took over, just because Giancarlo Esposito's character was the one who basically held everything down and like was basically running things. So without someone strategic like that, and you have Homelander again failing upward, they're just struggling to stay afloat. But anyways, now we gotta wait approximately another year and a half, 2 years for because they just announced that season 5 will drop in 2026. So we got some time. Hopefully we'll get another Gen V or at least something to keep us entertained until then. But for those of you that watch this season, let us know what you thought in the comments. We'd love to get your input in on that. But until next time, everyone, stay bodacious and keep on ranting for us.
Absolutely, everybody. Be good, be safe, and as always, we'll catch y'all on the next one.